This video walks you through the key stitches used to create the peacock and the jay. The border is created using a straight stitch. I start by doing a running stitch along the central line of the leaf pattern. I then work backwards to create each leaf using 3 straight stitches to do the outline and then 1 central stitch to fill. This is just one way you could create these leaves, and you could stitch them in a different way. For example, working from side to side in a satin stitch. On either side of the leaf pattern is a border created using chain stitch, the inside in a light pink, the outside in a dark pink. This is just a straightforward chain stitch, and the only thing to watch for is to try to keep each of your chains of an equal length. The peacock is stitched in a mix of straight stitch and split stitch. The main area of the feathers are stitched using a satin stitch, as shown here. You can work this satin stitch the whole way, keeping a consistent direction. Your stitches will get very short at times as you go around the eyes of the feathers. As you add the next layers of the feather, you'll do this also using a satin stitch, coming out of where your previous layer of the feathers ended. The eyes of the feathers are created using a split stitch. We use split stitch as this is much easier to get the curve of the shape. Whilst on the larger eyes you would be able to achieve this in a satin stitch, as you get to the smaller shapes you'll find that it's much easier to use a split stitch. On the curves, keep your split stitch shorter. This will help you achieve the rounded shape more easily. The key aim here is to achieve good coverage, so don't worry about overlapping the stitches side by side. We want to avoid seeing the white fabric behind. The neck of the peacock is stitched in a satin stitch. However, as we go down the body, we change that to a split stitch. This is simply due to the smaller areas being stitched, and therefore using this split stitch you'll find it much easier to create the curves. I find it easiest to do the outline first and then go back and fill in the gaps. But this is personal preference, and you should stitch it however you find easiest. You'll notice on the border around the feathers that I have done the chain stitch despite not yet having filled in the feathers. if you do it this way, it won't cause any problems, and it gives you a nice edging to do your satin stitch against. The J is also stitched using split stitch in the areas shown here, and then the rest is covered in satin stitch. Once you've mastered the peacock, you'll find this all very straightforward to stitch up the J. You can see me doing areas of the split stitch here along the tail feathers. I'm using quite a long split stitch, given it's a relatively straightforward area to cover and you haven't got many angles or curves in it. When it comes to the feet, I may work with a slightly shorter split stitch, particularly around the bottom. This is just to enable me to get into those edges and the tight corners more easily. Here on his main body, this section is stitched using a satin stitch. Again, I'd pick the direction you want your stitches to go in, whether that's top to bottom or left to right, and then just work consistently in that direction. You can mix though and do the scallops in a different direction if you want to get more variation. As with all these kits, this is just one way you can stitch it, but do use your creativity and you can stitch it in any way you'd like.